Hi folks, Harry Frank from Gray Machine here, and this is going to be part 2 of the Lightspeed effect in Adobe After Effects. So in the first part, we made the stars. So we used Trapcode Particular to generate points in space, and then we started to stretch these out using the aux system of Particular, and kind of made this jump to Lightspeed effect, or at least a big start of it. From here, if we look at the original, we go from points in space that stretch out, converge to a point, and then kind of fill the screen. And we talked a little bit in the last tutorial about some of the tricks that you can see that are going on in here, because we do not have enough stars in this very first moment in time to fill the whole field of view with stars. And you notice halfway through this effect, we start to see additional stars kind of coming in from the side. And then in a very short number of frames, we have lots more points in space that kind of flood everything, converge to a point. The tunnel kind of comes in the background, or literally it just kind of fades in or kind of wipes in, and then goes to this tunnel effect. And we also have some of these streaks happening in here, which I have constructed, but I don't know if we'll have time in part 2. So in part 2, we're going to make this tunnel. So let's get to the tunnel. Now I'm going to make this with Trapcode MIR. I tried lots of different ways using CC cylinder and all that kind of stuff, and nothing really that I was happy with. MIR is a perfect way to do this. It's very flexible. Very you notice it'll come together quite quickly. So I'm going to apply Trapcode MIR. If you're not familiar with MIR, just a quick background on it. It is a two-dimensional flat plane that exists in 3D space that can be distorted with fractal distortion, 3D fractal distortion, and bent in 3D space as well. And we actually have two different bends here. One, we have a geometry bend. So let me take this amplitude down and bring up this size just to illustrate this. So we have a bend in the geometry section. You notice what happens when I move the geometry bend is that the bend moves through the distortion, through the fractal noise distortion. If I bend in the fractal section, you'll notice that the fractal noise bends along with the fractal noise distortion. So it's actually bending the fractal noise distortion. I have no idea what kind of crazy math is going on to achieve this, how we're bending 3D fractal noise in 3D space, but it looks cool. And that's basically the difference between the two, between the geometry bend and the fractal bend, is that you are bending the fractal noise along with it, whereas the geometry bend moves the geometry through the fractal noise. I found, in my experience, I end up using, for this tunnel, the fractal bend. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that there's this cool spiral effect that you can kind of add a little bit of twist to the tunnel. And that works, well, it really only works if we're using the fractal bend. It doesn't really work out if we're using the geometry bend. So let's make a tunnel. So I'm going to zero the amplitude. And we need to make this much bigger. So I'm going to set this to, I don't know, let's say just 900 in the X for now, and 8,000 in the Y. That might be a little big, but we can always come back to it. So we have a really, really big plane. And if I, let's set this to 2 views and set this second view to a custom view, you can see a flat plane that's actually starting to clip in space here. I'm going to go down to the visibility and turn all this stuff up. We have visibility that is a far clipping. So this is it just clips the visibility of the rendering so many pixels away from the camera. So I'm going to set this to like 20,000. We don't need to clip this. There's also this fog rendering. As things get far away from the camera, it will fade into this fog color, which we don't see yet, but we will see the second I rotate this on its side and change the color of the fog. So I'm going to rotate this in 90 degrees. So we have basically a flat plane. In fact, it's so flat we don't really see it. So the camera's kind of sitting right on top of it. I'm going to move this down just a little bit in Y so we can actually see it. Now you can see fog color. If I set this to a crazy color or whatever, that off in the distance it starts to fade into that fog color. So right now you can see that I am actually creating quite a bit of geometry that's not being seen by the camera. That's always a bad idea. So even with GPU and all that, we just don't want to waste any surface rendering. So let's fine tune this position and size a little bit. So I can move this forward in Z. I'm going to bring this down, let's say to like 5,000 and push this back a little bit. There we go. Now I certainly don't need our fog set to this orange color. I'm going to reset this to white, but we also just want to turn this off. Or not turn, well, I can't really turn it off, but I can set it to a very high value. So I'll set these both to 20,000 so it won't be interfering with us. So now we just need to bend this. So I'm going to go to that fractal section and we're going to bend this in the Y. So I'm going to bend this all the way up to the point where these corner or the edges overlap. And notice that because I moved this down, it's actually nicely centered right, the tunnel is actually centered right in the middle of the screen. So now I can move the camera through this tunnel. We're not going to be animating the camera that much. We will do a bit of a camera turn, but we're not moving through the tunnel. We're going to give the illusion of moving through the tunnel rather than moving through the tunnel, because that's actually a lot easier. We don't need to make a giant tube of geometry and fly the camera through the tunnel, when we can just move the texture along the surface of the tunnel and basically achieve the same effect and work a lot smarter and not harder. So let's make the texture for the tunnel. So I'm going to make our surface texture. This is basically our fractal noise surface. And the reason we're making a fractal noise surface is we look at this, the interior of this tunnel is pretty much a textbook fractal noise surface. It's just applied to the inside of the walls and stretched out a little bit, and some motion blur and glow and stuff on it to make it feel like it's moving and warping in time and space and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to turn these stars off so we don't have to render those. So we've got our surface, our solid, and I'm going to apply the effect, generate, or not generate, noise, fractal noise right there. And we need to pre-compose this because that's just how After Effects works. If I apply that surface texture to mirror, it's going to see the source of the solid and not the fractal noise that's rendered to it. So let's go to texture, and we're going to actually not apply it yet because we need to pre-compose this, move all attributes inside the new composition. So it'll take that fractal noise effect along with it. So this will be our fractal noise surface. I might have another one of these made, but that's okay. So if I go inside here, here's our fractal noise. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to add a little bit of mask to this so that we can feather those edges. And in fact, I'm going to draw it like so. And the reason for this is that a couple of reasons. We're going to feather it along the X here. I think about 100 pixels works. I'll bring this in just a little bit. So these will be the edges of the tunnel, and we want to feather these so that as the edges touch, that they will kind of blend. The end of the tunnel, the far end of the tunnel texture is going to be right here. So if I feather this, we will also fade that off. So that's sort of off into the distance. So I'm going to lock this comp right here, and then, wait, I don't need two views here. Set this to one view. This is locked. I'm going to go back to my composition, Lightspeed composition here, and we want to turn this layer off, go to mirror, go to texture layer, fractal noise surface, there. So I want these two to be visible side by side. I'm going to drag this comp over like that. So this is our tunnel, that's locked. This is our fractal noise surface, that is locked. So I can kind of hop back and forth between these compositions and see them both at the same time. So I'm gonna go back to mirror and adjust that bend so that we have these just touch like so. Now notice as I bring these together that we see sort of a blend mode, an add blend mode, which is right here in the shader. So we don't need these to blend, I just need a normal blend like so. Now this should be the end of the tunnel. Yep. So I might need to tweak that a little bit. Let's go to the fractal noise section here. Just turn that up a little bit more, and you'll notice that it's starting to fade off at the very edge of the tunnel. Let's call this 250. So looking at this now, let's close this out. Let's jump to a custom view like this. Looking at this, our tunnel might need to be a little bit longer. So again, I want to tweak this just a little bit. So we'll go back in our size. Remember, I started at 8,000. I brought it down to 5,000. And I'm going to kind of stretch it out a little bit more. So I'll set that to 7,000. Again, it's scaling at about its center. So I need to move it back so that we get it right about here. That's feeling pretty good. Now, in the original, again, so reference this. Notice one of the challenges that we have here is that it starts in the black space, the nothingness of space, everything converges, and then off in the distance of that tunnel, it actually switches to a white. So at some point we need to bring in a white background. So it kind of fades on during that convergence point, but I don't know when that needs to come in. We'll just kind of pick a point in time, like 4 seconds or so, where we're calling that the transition from the stars to the tunnel, and that will need to fade on some sort of brilliant way. The fractal noise, this is still locked. I'm going to unlock that. This fractal noise texture here, I'm going to keep tweaking until that feels good. There, that made a pretty big difference. So feathering that 300, that gives it kind of this nice little fade offy kind of glow kind of thing going on. So now we need to adjust our fractal noise, really. So looking at this, it's kind of we can see some complexity in there, of the fractal noise, but it's kind of blobby. So some just subtle changes that we need to make to the fractal noise. Largely, I think it's just the scale and width of it, and then just some minor changes to the complexity and well, really kind of the more complex layers of the fractal noise. So I think this would be worthwhile to look at both compositions at the same time. So let's make another viewer and go to this fractal noise surface and lock this. So let's go to fractal noise and go to the settings here under transform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and look at my source settings in here. When I did this, you notice that, the default settings are actually, contrast is 100 and brightness is 100, which is, as far as I know, these are the default settings. Yeah. So it's just some minor changes that I made to it, specifically the transform section. So we need to scale the width and height a little bit, and then just some minor changes to the sub influence so that we're seeing less of the detailed areas of the fractal noise. It's still there. We still want that detail, but we just want to have less of an influence on things. So let's see if we can get this. So let's go in here. We're going to uncheck uniform scaling. We're going to turn this width up so that it's just a little more, wide. And then we're going to stretch this out quite a bit. So it really kind of gives us that flying through space and the tunnel kind of thing. Now let's add some keyframes here so we have that motion going on. Now, if we look at this reference, we see that we have 2 different types of motion. We are flying through the tunnel, and the tunnel itself is also having, I think, just a little bit of a twist. Not twist to it, but it's actually kind of moving a little bit in a spiral. Not in a spiral, but you'll see what I mean. It's moving in both directions. So it's moving very quickly in Y and a little bit in X. So I'm going to set a keyframe to the offset turbulence right here at the beginning. And we'll hop to the end. And we are needing to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So we're flying backwards through the tunnel, right? So we have our back to the hyperspace, hyperspeed, hyper warp, whatever we're doing. And we're looking into the tunnel moving backwards. So this needs to be set to a pretty high value at the very end. We'll set this to maybe 15,000 pixels, and we'll see if that works for us. Pretty close. We need to play it in real time to get a feel for our motion. Why did I? Yeah, sorry. Let's go in and add some of that X motion as well. So at the very end key, and I'm going to add just a little bit of X motion so that this is moving in Y and moving in X. Another thing that we can do, which I didn't mention, in Mirror here, there is a cool thing called spiral. And I can just use a very slight spiral on this so it gives a little bit of a twist to it. We need to add, just to do a couple tweaks here. I'm going to bring the sub influence down. So what we're doing is the more detailed layers of noise that are stacked on top of each other, which is what fractal noise is. We want to see the bottom layers, which are the large sections of noise. In fact, we can basically see that, you know, bottom layers of noise by setting the complexity to 1. So this is like the base layer of noise. So these big layers of noise is what we want to see kind of coming through a bit more. So if we bring the sub influence down, we'll still see the detail there from those upper layers, but they are just influencing less, or they're basically less visible from one layer of noise to the next. So if I kind of turn this down, I don't need to turn it down that much, but I just want to see more of those darker, deeper areas. And that's really kind of where that fractal noise look is coming from. So now we're going to add a color correction tritone and make it blue. Okay, and let's make an adjustment layer for our glow. Option Command Y. Let's apply stylized glow, not mosaic. Stylize glow. Turn up the radius quite a bit and bring down the glow intensity. Also, I'm going to apply a color correction effect here. We're just going to add some curves here, add a little bit of contrast to this tunnel just by creating what we call an S-curve. So darker shadows, brighter brights, all that kind of good stuff. I wonder if our camera can move back just a little, or maybe if I need to change the type of camera. That sort of that opening at the end of the tunnel, I think could be a little bit more narrow. I'm gonna go into the camera type here, and let's say we set this to 28 millimeter, just to make it a little bit more off in the distance. Now the camera angles and all that kind of stuff are actually a little bit different here. It's kind of in the hole, the opening. Notice that, well, we kind of start everything framed center, or actually just below the center. So that sort of convergence point is just below center. And then our camera needs to, well, it kind of starts to jumble around. And then it kind of lowers down like that. I have my camera from the first one parented to a null, which I should actually name this null. Let's double check here. Yep. I want the camera to pivot about the center of the camera. I have this parented to a null that's way, way over here. So I'm going to unparent this. Look at the position of my camera, copy the position of the camera, paste it back to the null, and then parent the null, or parent the camera back to the null. So now as I rotate this null, we're going to get a nice little pivot like so, especially making this sort of pan around easier like so. So to frame it where this thing needs to go, I need to animate to the orientation or rotation or whatever I want to do of this null. If you want to do orientation, you can do orientation. I'm going to do X and Y rotation. Just to adjust this, kind of get it lower in the frame. And it's quite possible. I think the camera might need to move down a little bit just to kind of frame things a little bit more dramatically. So now we have some really stiff moves here. So I'm going to set these two keyframes to at least be not linear, or maybe just these speed curves just a little bit. And I actually don't need the Z rotation. Looks like it feels like our camera is a little close to the right side of this tunnel, so I'm going to fine tune this a little bit. So things are in the center here. So let's set a keyframe here. Frame this. There's our center point, and we actually want to let's look at the rotation. Sorry, let's get right on top of those keyframes there, so we're not making extra keyframes. So I want to move this down just a touch so that the point of convergence is just below center. And then once everything moves, I can move this camera over just a little, maybe move it down. so it feels a little bit more at the bottom of the tunnel. Taking some creative liberty here. I mean, I don't work for Industrial Light and Magic. I don't have to make this scene perfect. But, whoop, that moves a little quickly. Slow that camera move down, but it does feel like it's moving into the right place. So notice because I'm using mirror, and I can hit play, and we can get pretty quick feedback out of how things look. And it's another really good reason to use mirror, because mirror renders on the GPU super fast. Speaking of fast, I think our fractal noise can be moving a lot faster. So let's go in here. I'll set this to maybe 20, whatever I did, 25,000 or so. And then a little bit of motion blur is going to help with this. I'm going to go in here to, oh gosh, what do I want to blur? What we can do is blur the surface a little bit and save ourselves some render time. So I can go in here, add a fast blur vertical like that. And this is actually going to add some blurring to that. If you want to add like force motion blur or whatever, you can do that as well. But I think this should actually be pretty good. Now, really quickly, I'm going to show you the additional streaks that are on here. If I back up, so this is sort of the way things were transitioned from the streaks into the tunnel, at least part of it. So I'm going to duplicate it. So sorry, before I get ahead of myself, we have a tunnel, and I'm going to duplicate this, and this is going to be not the mirror tunnel, but these are going to be mirror streaks, and we're going to use a second fractal noise layer. So let's go into here, fractal noise surface, reveal this in our project. So this is going to be fractal noise surface 1. And then duplicate that, and we've got fractal noise surface 2. In fact, I think I'm going to go back to my original here, fractal noise comp 2, show that in my project, and I might just repurpose this one just so this goes a little bit quicker. So fractal noise surface 1, fractal noise comp 2. Well, they're named a little bit inconsistently, but that's okay. So I'm going to turn this off and jump inside and show you exactly what's going on in here. So I've got a... okay, turn this. I got a fractal noise layer. Fractal noise, just standard, regular fractal noise. And what I'm animating is its brightness. So if I ignore all the masks and stuff like that, I'm just animating the brightness from a dark fractal noise to a not so bright, or I'm animating it from a very dark fractal noise up to the point where we see a very contrasty fractal noise. So if I look at our settings here, I have the contrast turned way up so we can get these sort of into streaks. And I've scaled the height here so that this fractal noise turns from regular noise into regular streaks. And once this gets applied to the tunnel, it becomes very stretched out, and these basically look like streaks. So I have these masks in here that basically all kind of are very close together, and then they spread apart. And then this is applied to that tunnel. So we're going to kind of come back to this, but that's the basic idea right now. So I have a very stretched out fractal noise that's very dark, goes into very streaky kind of thing, and then animates and moves. I'll show you these keyframes here. We're just animating the brightness and doing offset turbulence again so that they're kind of moving along in space. So that fractal noise comp is going to go to this second mirror streaks tunnel. So we have a second copy of this. And then instead of using that first texture, I'm going to use that second texture as I was just showing you. So this is the fractal noise comp 2. So these end up kind of being these stretched out streaky streak kind of things here. Looks like I need to fine tune this a little bit because of my masks. Looks like my settings changed a little bit. Wait. Hold on. I have a number of masks in here, and this yellow mask right here, the locked one, here it is. This is kind of determining the length of that tunnel. So I'd like to see this along with my light speed effect here. So if I move this tunnel, this mask right here, that moves towards the end of the tunnel. This moves closer to the tunnel right there. Now you'll notice I had another adjustment layer inside here. Let's lock that. Fractal noise comp. Offset is basically an offset filter. It just moves it in space. So I can have these kind of rotate around the tunnel, spin around the tunnel like so. So I just have a couple keyframes in there that have it rotate like so. So if I play this, and you can see all this stuff that I'm yapping about, what it looks like. So it starts in darkness, it kind of comes together. So I'm actually gonna go to this brightness, and I'll bring this, I'm gonna bring this on a little bit more quickly so that these kind of animate on. Let's preview this comp right here. Oh, that's all right, I've got this locked. So let's see how this looks. So these kind of come on, and we have all of these streaks, and then they start to spiral and then fade away. So if I turn that on, this needs to obviously blend a lot better. Let me check what I used. I just used a basic add blend mode. So let's go in here and set this streak one to add. That's probably, I probably brought it down in terms of its opacity. And I'm guessing I would have blurred this as well, because I think it needs that just a touch, maybe a couple pixels. There we go. And let's bring this white layer back here. So that's where we end up. We're pretty close, you know, considering we're working in After Effects and we made this, you know, in just a few minutes. I think we're doing pretty well. I don't have the camera in. We don't have any 3D objects. We don't have these things transitioning in between each other. So if we need to do a part 3, or if people ask for a part 3, I can definitely do a part 3 and just get into whatever we want to fly through this tunnel, banana or whatever. Transition between the stars and the tunnel, and just kind of do final tweaks and stuff like that. So that is probably for a part 3. So we'll do that in the next tutorial. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. My name is Harry Frank. Thank you so much for watching.